Justin, walk us through a little bit how a couple can be intentional about using this information to create or just maintain a safe environment. Something where it's actually adaptive to be social and be comfortable with each other.
I think that a lot of this is the individual pieces of the couple. So the co-regulation is essential. The cues that you're sending back and forth. So that's essential to the functioning of a couple. But both the individuals within that interaction, ideally, are as accessing as much of their safe and social state as possible. So part of this is individually, what can we do as far as our own work, our own growth, our own trauma healing if need be. But then as a couple, that I think that's would be a good time for what does our environment look like if they're living together. Maybe what does our shared environment look like, that, or what does it feel like? What does it smell like? How much space is there, so that we can function together? And that's a communication the two can have. But to me, that it's the individual pieces are extremely important to. Ideally, you want two people coming together that are in their most safe and social state possible.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally.
Yeah. Are there things that we can control for to try and create that situation, or to try and encourage ourselves and the person that we're with to be, a little bit more comfortable? I know you talked about how much you've worked to curate your office and create this like environment that's welcoming. How do we replicate that, or even just be aware of it when it's not under our control?
Individually, that's doable. So I guess my hesitation here is when we think about things in terms of couple, and it makes sense because of what we're here for, right? But when we start to think about, if I change myself, then this person will change, which is true. But if the motivation for changing yourself is to get someone else to change, I don't know how well it's going to go. So it's ideally, we have two individuals who are like, I just want to grow for me. And that will naturally affect the other person. And when it comes to co-regulation, as far as what cues I'm giving to my partner, right? If I'm in my safe and social state, those cues will come across naturally. I will smile naturally. I will be close gently naturally. I will have more, it's called prosody. It's more of a sing-songy quality to my voice. Like, those will just happen. And then your partner will pick up on those, and that will help them to climb their own polyvagal ladder into their own safe and social state. But if we enter these interactions with, how can I get this person to change their behavior or to climb their ladder, that's going to come from a very evaluative place. And if we're coming from an evaluative place, that's probably more of the flight fight energy. So evaluation is a lot different than acceptance and empathy. Empathy, acceptance, curiosity, that's a safe and social state, top of the ladder. Evaluation is flight fight energy. That's in the middle of the polyvagal ladder. So if we're looking at, here's my relationship and what do I bring to this? What do I do? How do I act? That's a lot different than, let me just work on me and bring the best version of me that I can possibly bring to this relationship. And if two people are doing that, I think you're off and running personally. Does that answer your question? Hopefully it did.
Yeah, I mean, in a broad sense, I hear what you're saying about not wanting to try and tie a lasso around somebody and yank them up the polyvagal ladder, or to try and push people in that way. But I also know in my own relationships, my partner and I's brains are just wired very differently. I like to joke about the fact that oftentimes I'll be brushing my teeth, and she will come to me while running the sink, while watching something on her phone. She's got a heater that's going on in the background with the electric motor. She's got a fan going on in the bathroom, and there are all of these different sounds. And while I'm brushing my teeth, she'll try to ask me about what I want to do tomorrow. And all of a sudden I realize, I have never been this stressed out by this question in my entire life. To her, that kind of background noise is really not a stressor. She's somebody who will refuse to sleep without a fan on. She always loves having that kind of background noise, and for me, that kind of thing can be really overwhelming. So a key to us having a functioning relationship is developing a little bit of a scorecard for each other, or even just a profile that says like, oh, if I'm going to ask Christy something important, I need to make sure the overhead light is off. I need to like work to create this scenario so that we can have this conversation effectively. And I guess I'm wondering if you can run us through maybe some bullet points on what to be aware of when we just want to be heard.
Based on what you were saying, I hear two people who care about each other, and that's the starting point. And then you can do the evaluative thing of like what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And I think two people that care will be able to hear that and maybe make some alterations, and it won't be a big deal. But if you have two people who are in their flight state attempting to figure out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, I don't think it's going to go very well. It's going to be a lot of blame, and well, this is because of these issues, and you're doing this to me. And if the starting point is that the empathy for each other, the compassion, the genuine love that we have for each other, then those evaluations of like, what do we do about this? That's going to go a lot smoother. And I think that's kind of what you were highlighting, is that I hear two people that care about each other, and that can have that conversation and are willing to make alterations in their daily life or alterations in their own personal behavior. And that's not manipulative. That comes from empathy. That comes from compassion. That's a lot different than I want to change myself so that you'll change. You know what I mean? That's very different. I hear two people that care. I hear two people that are willing to negotiate. That's healthy relationship skills that I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those skills of like negotiation or listening or whatever it is, those skills are a lot more doable after we're in our safe and social state enough. Because doing those skills from a fight energy or a shutdown place, that doesn't go very far. But when we're in our safe social state, then those skills that we've learned maybe as a couple or as an individual, those go a lot farther.
Yeah, what should we be looking for to develop those skills? If somebody is just being exposed to these ideas for the first time, maybe they have never stopped to think about the fact that having a candle lit can, cause a lot of stress. Or maybe when they are cooking, having the radio on versus talk versus music can be stressful, but they've never really looked at their life and put that together necessarily, and are kind of carrying that stress without having brought it to awareness. Are there any pieces of our life or of our environment that you might encourage us to be just more mindful of, or to perhaps take a look at if we are, feeling stressed and not knowing why some of the time?
The frustrating answer is all the pieces. All the pieces. I mean, how much clutter do you have in your space? How many crumbs are there on the table? That for me is crumbs. How much mail is piled up on the I'm not talking about my own family here whatsoever. How much mail is piled up on top of the counter? What's the lighting like? It's all these pieces of the environment, and every single one of them is going to have some sort of neuroception of safety or danger, and probably not enough to send someone over the edge, but it's enough. But those little buildups, those accumulation of things. So it's the accumulation of environment, but also the accumulation of how we interact with each other. Like, trying to talk during brushing my teeth, I can't really respond to you. So these little things that add up, and I think all these little pieces can be discussed and negotiated. Hopefully I'm answering the question that it's I'm being helpful here.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize how individualized this all is. So
right, that's the thing, yeah.
The real takeaway is, not to create this like perfectly soothing spa atmosphere so much as to just be willing to, I guess, flex on what's going on. I think Dan, our last caller, did a great job of kind of highlighting the fact that some of these things might seem unimportant or just not intuitive to us. Like for my partner, the fact that there's all that background noise isn't a problem. Like, I don't know that she would have ever been concerned about it. And her willingness to like hear me out when I say, for me, it's kind of a problem, is maybe the biggest goal or aspiration here.
Yeah. So the willingness is a big deal, right? And what I don't want is for people to hear this and beat themselves up because they are not willing. Willingness, the willingness to work with your partner, the willingness to change some of your behavior is not something you exactly. I don't choose to be willing. I am willing to work with somebody when I'm sufficiently self-regulated. Like I don't just turn it off and on, right? My empathy, I don't just turn it off and on. When I'm sufficiently self-regulated, that comes along with it. It kind of like it unlock. So with the polyvagal ladder, these different states unlock different skills or capabilities or functions. Not just physically, like when you're in a safe and social state, you can use the restroom. When you're in a flight fight energy and you actually have to run away from danger, no one's going to the bathroom, right? So the ability to use the restroom, the ability to hug somebody is only available when you're in your safe and the ability to smile is not available unless you're in your safe and social state. And so willingness and listening and negotiation, all these things, you don't just turn on, you have to be sufficiently self-regulated. And then if we have two of those people, then those skills are useful. Then those skills that are unlocked, we can now use them in order to tailor our behavior or tailor our environment. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm following. I am curious if you have any kind of final takeaways on maybe how to apply this, or even just be aware of it in daily life. I hope that even if we're not being hyper evaluative and stressing about our environment, that we can all kind of step out of this just noticing that the way the world looks to us may not be how it feels to everybody else.
Yeah, when I first started learning about this, I became like intensely aware of how things, like how I felt about my environment. And I work in a public school, so I was like so curious that I started setting myself up for little experiments. And like right when school let out, there's this flood of kids that just rush out, right, to get to their parents or whatever. Back when we were allowed to go to school. So I would position myself in a place that was probably the most conducive to stress. And I'm a staff person, so it wasn't too weird, but I just stood there while these kids just like swarmed and like ran out of the classrooms and were screaming and yelling and pushing each other. And I just noticed how I felt about it. Like I was just curious, like what is this level of intensity? How do I feel? How does my biology respond to this? But I was also looking at the kids and like how they respond, how many of them were in their safe and social state. And I set myself up to see like how do I feel? And I think people can do that. It's just notice like how do I feel based on someone's voice, say based on someone's appearance, based on how much proximity I have to in my environment. How does something taste? Like how does my biology respond to that? And I think a really good measure of that is am I more or less capable of smiling? You know what I mean? Like if you taste something bad, you're not going to smile, probably, right? But if you taste something that's just like, ooh, like that just tastes good, a smile comes along with it. And so if you can begin to notice that, for me, I notice tension in my chest. If something's more sympathetically charging, like flight fight energy, I'll notice it here. That's usually where that lives. And because your heart rate goes up and there's a little bit more pressure on the chest. And then when something's more of a shutdown cue, then I notice that in my gut. And you feel, like for me, it feels like this twist or acid, like spikes of acid in my stomach. So if you can become, these things are happening for every single one of us, but if we don't slow down enough to notice them, we don't notice them. So they're happening. Your body's going through all these shifts constantly. But if you're not listening to what your body's saying, then you just miss them. So they're happening. I would really encourage people to become more curious as much as they can about what's happening within them, and especially the chest, the gut, and the face. These are kind of cues as to where you're at on your own polyvagal ladder.
All right, that's a lot to take in. I appreciate you kind of walking us through the neuroscience of it, and also giving us sort of a map for how to maybe identify it in our lives.